Good morning, everyone. Proceeding, All right, we should be good at.
You ready?
I think we're ready.
All right. Good, good morning. It's Monday morning. Time for our morning high five. This morning we are going to look at Joshua chapter 11, the whole chapter. Um, we hope that you have read it. If you haven't read it before, we hope you read it um, after to kind of piece together what we're talking about. We're not going to read the whole thing, or we'll summarize it. Um, So in chapter 10, um, the the children of Israel, the nation of Israel, was able to pretty much take over and defeat most of the nations in the southern part of Canaan. In chapter 11, they are going to do battle with the nations in the northern part of Canaan. And so in chapter 11, I was just counting them. It seems like there's about maybe 10 to 11 nations that are coming together to try and defeat Israel. So they all join forces, even though that didn't work for the people in the South. They decide we're going to join up and try and defeat um, Israel. We are going to try and come together. And the Bible describes them as coming out in such a great number that they were like the number of sand that is on the seashore, which just means it was a bunch. They had horses, they had chariots, they had numbers. Um, but God tells Joshua, "Don't be afraid by their numbers. This time tomorrow, you will defeat them. Like I'm giving them over into your hands. You are gonna be victorious. Don't even. There's no reason for you to be afraid of them." Um, and so they do battle, um, just like God promised. Israel defeats them. Um, and then towards the end of the chapter, um, there are a group of people called the Anakim. And the Anakim were the giants of the land. The Anakim were the people, when they first went to the land and they spied it out, these were the major reason they decided we're not going. Like there's giants over there. They're bigger than us. We look like grasshoppers. We're not going. But in chapter 11, they defeat the Anakim. It's, you know, it doesn't say how long it took, but we know that they were victorious. Um, they followed all the instructions that Joshua gave them, and Joshua took a lot of his instructions from Moses. Moses was the one who really laid the groundwork for Joshua. Joshua followed the plan. They were obedient to God, and they experienced great success. In the last section of chapter 11, it says, "So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments, and the land had rest from war." That's the end of chapter 11. So a lot happens, um, but those are the major points. So now we'll kind of give you a couple of specifics. Richard, what'd you see?
So, one of the things that I saw that kind of stood out to me was verse 6. It says, "And the Lord said to Joshua, Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give over all of them slain to Israel." He says, "You should hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire." And what it made me kind of think about was that, it, like you said, 11 nations teamed up to defeat Israel. And it says there's so many, like sand in the seashore. Like nobody can look at a seashore and count sand. Nobody can know how many men or how many grains of sand that actually is. And that's
Right.
the view that Israel had of all these nations coming against them. They're just seeing a bunch of men, a bunch of horses, a bunch of people ready to defeat them. And if you're looking at it from Israel's point of view, this is not good. Like, you don't have the number of men to match what you're seeing. You don't have the resources to handle what you're seeing, right? And God tells them, like, do not be afraid. And he tells them this because this is a natural, like, human instinct to see, like, you outnumbered, to see somebody trying to defeat you, knowing that you can't not like you can't protect yourself in that situation. It's a natural instinct to become afraid. It's a natural instinct to have fear. Even though they just defeated five nations who tried to team up against them previously, this is bigger. This seems more, right? And your natural instincts, although like God was just with you, it fear is a natural instinct. Like, God doesn't say, he doesn't punish people for having fear. It's a natural instinct that happens. But God has to remind Joshua that do not be afraid because I'm with you. Like, when God is with you, then you're able to overcome the natural fear that happens in your body. That natural fear that happens when you see things with your eyes that may seem impossible. And this is just God having to remind him, like, I know from your point of view, you can't handle what you see. But with me on your side, with me from my point of view, that's easy. And I'm telling you that. I'm telling you this time tomorrow. And it's just like, if you think like a day to defeat 11 nations that are so many people that you can't even count. But God is saying one day, 24 hours, they're going to be gone.
Right.
And that just seems so like I'm just reading and like just amazed, like all these people that you can't even count in number, and against Israel, which doesn't have the same resources and numbers to match them, but God is saying tomorrow they're all going to be dead. Tomorrow you're going to have all of them. They won't be a problem. The problem you see here today won't be the problem tomorrow.
Right.
Like, they're going to be gone. And that's just with God on your side, with God having your back. Those are the type of things that can happen. And so that was one of the main things that stood out to me.
Nah, I mean, they had horses, they had chariots, they had numbers. All Israel had was God.
Yeah.
And you see what happened. You see how that worked out. And I mean, again, sometimes you read these stories, these real life stories from the Bible, and you have to say, man, it can be that simple.
Yeah.
Not that it's easy. It's not easy. I'm sure it wasn't easy. Like, I'm sure they, like you said, they had to push through that fear of, my goodness, all these people trying to trying to defeat us. My man.
Yeah.
But it was simple in that they just had to believe and they had to obey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was looking at I was looking at verse 15. It says, just as the Lord had commanded Moses, his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. Um, I even went back to chapter 3. Chapter 3, if you think about it, all of this starts with them getting ready to cross the Jordan. It starts with them obeying God and going.
Yeah.
And that seems simple. You go, well, okay, yeah, they went. But remember, they were at this same spot at the Jordan before.
Yeah.
And they refused to go. They were
Mm-hmm.
like, no, no, we are not going over there. We don't think God can do it. We're not gonna fight those people. As
Yeah.
a matter of fact, we're gonna go back to Egypt. That's what we're gonna. If we're going anywhere, we're going back to Egypt. We are not. I repeat, not crossing this river. We no.
Yeah.
But now this time, the first step was obeying God and going, stepping their foot into the Jordan River, believing even though it was flooding, God can keep us. God is going to protect us, and all of it. All these other victories start from just their obedience in saying we're going to believe God.
Yeah.
And I think it ties right into what Pastor Manuel's been talking about. What, 7 weeks?
7
7 weeks
weeks.
of just over and over and over again. If you really believe, you will obey. Like that, it doesn't get any simpler than that. If you believe, you will obey. And
Yeah.
then just that last part in verse, um, the last little section, 23, 21, 22, 23. One of the last groups of people that they defeat are the Anakim. And the Anakim were the giants of the land. The Anakim are the ancestors of, like, even Goliath. Goliath, his family tree comes from the Anakim, like the Phyllis, these giant people.
Yeah.
They were the Anakim. These were the people that they were originally scared of, that
Right.
had them feeling like we are grasshoppers. We cannot go into that land and be successful. They have giants there. How are we going to defeat giants?
Yeah.
And it doesn't even go into detail about how they defeated the Anakim. All it says is, like Richard pointed out, the God had already promised them this land, and we read the last portion. They took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken. They gave out the different pieces to the tribes, just like God had promised,
Hmm.
and the land had rest. Like there was no one left to to war with. I mean, there were still certain pieces that the individual tribes were supposed to take over,
Hmm.
but the greater portion of the battle, they
Yeah.
won it. They went in, they did exactly what God said, and they were able to be successful. And it just reminded me. I know it's obvious, it's not like super deep, but it really is. Like, I believe it's intended to show us obedience leads to success.
Yeah.
That's the only way you get success, is by being obedient.
Hmm.
Joshua could have came up with all kinds of plans and strategies. It wouldn't have it wouldn't have had the same result. They were clearly outnumbered.
Right. Right.
Clearly outnumbered. It wasn't their skill. It wasn't that they became so ferocious that, warriors. Like, it was God. It was God on their side. They obeyed him. He had given them a promise. They believed it, and they obeyed because they believed, and they had success. So it, these are those stories that should really encourage us. Like, what's your, you know, what's your Anakim situation? What's your 11 nation sand on the seashore situation that you're just like, I don't see it, but
Right.
I believe God can do it. What's that situation in your life?
Hmm.
So, anything else, Rich?
No, that's pretty much the only thing I was think was just like we have the prayer call coming up. Um,
Yes.
so we could definitely invite people there.
Yeah, you roll right from here to the prayer call. Soon as we finish with you all, that's where I'll be at. You could hear us on the prayer, you hear us on the prayer call. Yeah, we went live today a little bit later than normal, but we wanted to make sure that we did talk about chapter 11. And as always, this when this video is up, I saw some of you saying good morning to us. We appreciate you joining us. We would love to hear your thoughts on this lesson. So, having said that, if God says the same, we'll be back next week on Monday with chapter 12.